This is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
The World Trade Organization Selection Committee endorses Nigeria's Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala for WTO top job. The WHO reports 2.8 million COVID-19 cases all over the world in the last week, the highest 7-day surge since the pandemic began. And jihadists behind 2015 Mali terror attacks sentenced to death. This is Africa Live, coming to you from Nairobi. I am Peninah Karibe. Thank you very much for joining us. Also coming up this hour, Africa's financial markets show improved resilience in spite of the COVID-19 pandemic. And Barcelona bagged Champions League win as Morata has a hat-trick of goals disallowed. We begin in Nigeria. The army has revealed that it acted on orders by the Lagos state government to help intervene in the EndSARS protests, which have turned violent. At least a dozen people have been killed during those protests. Meanwhile, the Nigerian National Petroleum Corporation fears for prolonged petrol scarcity as a result of curfews imposed to deal with potential violence. Our correspondent Philly Haza reports from Abuja.
The Army Public Relations Acting Director Oshoba Olaniyi said soldiers did not get involved in the EndSARS protest until they were invited by the Lagos government to help restore order in the state. Thousands of demonstrators had been peacefully demanding an end to police brutality for weeks across Nigeria. However, it turned violent. Videos on social media showed men in military uniform firing live ammunition at some of the protesters at a toll gate in Lagos last week. According to Amnesty International, 12 people were killed and dozens more injured. However, Olaniyi says soldiers did not shoot at protesters and claims such reports are fake. Meanwhile, in Abuja, residents have been queuing up at fuel stations for petrol as reports of scarcity resonated on Tuesday. But the spokesman for NNPC, Kenny Obateru, says there is no cause for alarm as there was more than 2 billion litres of premium motor spirit or PMS in stock to guarantee steady supply for at least 60 days. According to Obateru, there was a slight delay in supply by fuel tankers as a result of the curfews imposed by some state governments to curb pockets of violence in parts of the country. The violence began after thugs started attacking peaceful protesters, destroying properties and looting food supplies. The NNPC spokesman says the queues at the fuel stations caused by panic buying are expected to disappear before the end of the week as more states return to normalcy and lift the curfews. President Muhammadu Buhari has condemned the violent acts and insists that all security agents maintain law and order across the country. Phil Ihaza, CGTN, Abuja.
A court in Mali has sentenced 2 jihadists to life for the killing of over 24 people in attacks targeting Westerners in 2015. These shocking attacks were among the first to explicitly target bars and restaurants popular with foreigners in Mali. The West African nation has been gripped by a brutal jihadist insurgency since 2012. The 3 include Fawaz Ould Ahmed, who is a Mauritanian Islamist, also known as Ibrahim 10. The other is Sadou Chaka from Mali. A third defendant, Malian national Abdul Baki Abdra Mane Maiga, was also sentenced, but in absentia.
Our first expectation according to the law is that the motivation of the accused persons in this case be understood. Our main objective is that this right be said, that the steps be taken, and that the educational role of the hearing of this court also allows not only Malians to understand what is happening, but also those who are tempted to be involved in this kind of crime to understand that we are in a state that is guided by law.
Libyan authorities have dug up 12 more bodies from 4 more unmarked graves in the city of Tarwana, southeast of the capital Tripoli. Scores of corpses have been discovered since the area was recaptured by the Government of National Accord. CGTN's Joy Kiruki brings us the details.
when Turkish support helped Libya's internationally recognized government of national accord take back Tahuna in June, its fighters found a hospital piled with bodies. Also discovered were unmarked graves containing the bodies of those who had been declared missing. Tahuna had for years been controlled by a militia known as the Kaniyat. The Kaniyat fought alongside Khalifa Haftar's forces based in the east, rival to the GNA in the west. The GNA has issued arrest warrants for Kaniyat leaders who are now believed to be in eastern Libya.
We were in the city of Tahuna on June the 10th at Mashru al-Rabat. On that day, 10 bodies were dug out, 3 of which were in pieces and the other 7 were whole. The diggings are ongoing, of course, since receiving the call. We are working directly under the instruction of the public prosecutor.
Investigators from the GNA's Missing Persons Bureau have also been digging in areas around Tahuna. Dozens of bodies have been unearthed.
Today, on October the 27th, we specifically found 4 sites. These 4 sites had 4 bodies buried. We started working on these 4 sites. The first site had 1 body, and the second had 2 bodies. The third site had what looked like 5 to 7 bodies. We're still working on that. We're also still looking into the 4th site. Until this day, we have dug out around 95 bodies.
Prosecutors from the International Criminal Court said the mass graves discovered may be evidence of war crimes. Authorities say some of the bodies have shown signs of restraint and evidence of torture. Joy Kiruki Juma, CGTN.
Tensions between France and Turkey are escalating over their leaders' comments on the treatment of Muslims. Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan vented outrage Wednesday at what he called a disgusting cartoon in the French satirical weekly Charlie Hebdo. Erdogan's office has vowed legal and diplomatic action. France, in turn, wants the European Union to take measures against Turkey over a series of provocations. The dispute was triggered after the beheading of a French teacher by an immigrant teenager offended by cartoons of the Prophet Muhammad, which the teacher showed in class. Iran's President Hassan Rouhani also warns insulting the Prophet may encourage violence and bloodshed. France says it will always uphold freedom of expression.
In the
context that you are aware of, we did talk about relations with Turkey. What I would like to say simply and clearly is that in spite of what I called intimidation in my opening remarks, France will never give up on its principles and its values, and on the freedom of expression and the freedom to publish.
You're watching Africa Live. We're taking a short break. Coming up, the WHO reports 2.8 million COVID-19 cases all over the world in the last week, the highest 7-day surge since the pandemic began. And top Chinese leadership expected to unveil 14th five-year plan.
Africa is a continent of diversity, with varied climates and enchanting geography, and a people so distinct, but with a shared enduring spirit. We are at the heart of the continent to bring you the untold stories.
Let's have a look.
We celebrate Africa as it shapes its own destiny.
Tunis, Cairo,
Juba,
Ethiopia,
Tanzania.
Africa Live. Find your voice.
I try to not let it affect me, but there are days when it does. I'm a human being, and to see patients in a hospital bed and their family members are not there, there's no one there to hold their hand, that human touch, you know?
I just hope everyone can remember that the
situation is not permanent and that everything will get better eventually.
The US has rejected the front-running candidate to head the World Trade Organization, defying the body's other 160 member nations and leaving the outcome of the race uncertain. Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala, a former Nigerian finance minister, has attracted more widespread support to become the next Director General than her rival. But the US, critical of the WTO's handling of global trade, wants another woman, South Korea's Yoo Myung-hee, saying she could reform the body. If confirmed, Okonjo-Iweala would be the first woman and first African to lead the World Trade Organization. China has donated 180 tons of rice to South Sudan's security sector. The South Sudanese government says the donation will be used to feed tens of thousands of soldiers in various training camps across the East African country. The 2018 South Sudan peace deal requires that all armed forces be reunified, retrained and redeployed. The soldiers are now waiting to graduate and be redeployed. The government says the delay in completing the process is due to the COVID-19 pandemic.
So far, China has delivered all it is promised to support, to provide in-kind support for the peace process, especially the unification of army.
The people of China have stood with us in this peace process, particularly in the implementation of transitional security arrangements.
Conservationists in South Africa are trying to ward off a potential environmental disaster. Hundreds of thousands of microplastic pellets have been washing up on Cape Town's beaches. They are believed to have come from a shipping container that fell overboard more than 500 kilometers away. Here's CGTN's Travis Andrews with the details.
Noodles are bead-like plastic pellets that are a raw material used to make a variety of plastic products. Over the last few days, they've been washing up on a number of South Africa's beaches. There's great concern that the noodles, which are arriving every day, could cause significant harm to the marine environment.
I think it really is an environmental catastrophe. Every single noodle has the potential to get stuck in the digestive tract of a fish, and they also do leak chemicals. They don't just leach chemicals, they also absorb toxic chemicals. So they really have the potential to accumulate in the food chain. So it is quite a disaster.
Members of the public as well as the shark spotters team have been collecting the noodles around the peninsula and taking them to a central collection point. The pollution spillage is said to have originated close to the Eastern Cape, which is a busy route for heavily laden shipping liners.
The whole really southern coastline of South Africa started commenting from as far away as Plettenberg Bay, saying that there are a lot washed up there. So really it does just seem to be a widespread problem, and it just appears to be getting worse. Every single day more noodles are coming up.
Of particular concern is the impact the noodles could have on local fish species, who can mistake them for fish eggs or squid. They're also quite buoyant, which increases the distances they are able to travel. More than 300,000 noodles have already been collected, but even more is thought to be out there at sea, and many are headed this way.
If you think that 1 kilo has 30,000 noodles in it, then it's an incredible amount of noodles that have washed up, and so it can be an incredible amount of damage that could be done.
For now, many more kilos of noodles are arriving with every day and are being cleaned and stored so that they can eventually be quantified to assess the overall impact of this unfortunate event. Travis Andrews, CGTN, Cape Town.
Let's shift our focus to a record spike that has been recorded in global coronavirus cases. The world has seen 2.8 million new cases in the past week. The World Health Organization reports that the highest jump so far in a 7-day period. Europe saw the most with over 1.3 million infections. This accounts for nearly half of all cases worldwide. South Africa, Kenya and Ethiopia saw the highest numbers in Africa, but the continent only accounted for 1% of new cases. Southeast Asia reported nearly 500,000 cases, but the region continued a 5-week trend of falling numbers. The Americas accounted for the second highest surge, with the United States, Brazil and Argentina leading the tally. The WHO says the number of new deaths worldwide is comparable to previous weeks. The British government says it wants to stick to localized lockdowns to control COVID-19. This comes after France and Germany announced new nationwide stay-at-home orders on Wednesday. Britain has also been facing pressure after a recent study showed that nearly 100,000 people were catching the virus in the UK each day. Regional lockdowns mostly cover areas in northern England, while the governments of Wales and Scotland have different sets of restrictions. German Chancellor Angela Merkel promised to offer more economic support for companies hurt by the pandemic. The move comes after Germany said it will impose a new month-long lockdown to reverse a spike in coronavirus cases. Merkel said the government will compensate affected companies. Under the €10 billion aid package, some smaller enterprises would get 75% of their income in support, while self-employed workers will receive access to emergency loans. With the third highest number of infections in the world, Brazil had plenty of volunteers to test an experimental vaccine being co-developed by Brazilian and Chinese labs. But could a domestic political feud hinder its progress? Our correspondent Paulo Cabral has the story.
Advanced clinical trials with the Chinese-designed COVID-19 vaccine CoronaVac have proven safe enough for Brazil's health agency Anvisa to authorize the state of São Paulo to import 6 million doses from China. The Ministry of Health announced its intention to buy 46 million doses of the vaccine developed by Chinese pharmaceutical company Sinovac and its local partners, São Paulo's Butantan Institute. If the trials prove successful, the ministry said it could distribute the vaccine sometime next year. But a couple of days later, President Jair Bolsonaro made these remarks, writing in a Facebook post that he decided not to buy CoronaVac, saying the Brazilian people would not be anyone's cobaia or guinea pigs for what he called the Chinese vaccine of João Dória. João Dória is the governor of São Paulo who signed the deal with China to test and produce the CoronaVac here. And that's the issue.
We have a special conflict between the federal government and the governor of the state of São Paulo, João Dória, who wants to be a presidential candidate into 2022. And so Bolsonaro sees him as an adversary or even as an enemy.
When asked if this will affect China-Brazil relations, Chinese officials directed attention to the joint clinical trials, saying they were smoothly progressing.
We believe our cooperation will help people in China, Brazil, and across the world defeat the pandemic.
This is one of the clinics where volunteers come to take their shots. Initially, the plan was to carry out the testing with just over 9,000 volunteers, all of them healthcare workers. But recently, health authorities expanded this number to 13,000 to try and accelerate this final phase of testing.
I was coming here thinking about it. If it works, and I believe it will, this is something I want to tell my grandchildren in the future, for example, that I participated in this whole story, you know.
Here in this research center, 750 volunteers have received injections, either with CoronaVac or a placebo. The plan is to test here a total of 1,000 volunteers.
The data that we have about this vaccine is that for safety, this vaccine is not showing any severe adverse events that would be possibly related to the vaccine, and it's showing a nice safety profile, but the efficacy analysis is still pending, and we are hoping that will be released as soon as possible in the next couple of months.
Besides the CoronaVac, there are 3 other vaccines undergoing trials in Brazil, all of them in phase 3 testing, the final stage before it's licensed.
The Chinese vaccine has taken important steps, but still very little has been published about it for us to have greater security about it. The vaccine that has published more consistently is the one being developed by the Oxford University.
Based on the science so far, laboratories in Rio and São Paulo say production could begin by the middle of next year, if local politics don't get in the way. Paulo Cabral, CGTN, São Caetano do Sul, Brazil.
The UN reports that the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic has been harder on women and girls in many countries. In Nigeria, women holding key roles in schools face multiple tasks, such as helping their families and pupils observe precautions. CGTN's Kelechi Emekalam brings us the story of how a secondary school teacher has been adjusting to life during the pandemic.
It's the start of a new day for Michael Oluwadamilare as she journeys to work. This has been the toughest year in her decade as a teacher in the Nigerian capital, Abuja. The mother of 5 also had to contend with a 40% pay cut. With schools reopening amid easing coronavirus restrictions, the pressure is on to keep her students and her own children safe.
I think it's more the way we do things now. We have regulations following the COVID-19 precautionary measures we are taking. So it's not like the everyday school, the way it used to be. Now, when you come into school, you first have to take a temperature, go and wash your hands and move on. And it's the same with both staff and students. As a teacher, I have learned to adapt. I have learned to do new things. Then as a mother, I mean, it's different because you really have to, you have a lot of homework. You have to deal with the children, mental health and several other things. Dealing with the children who have been home for over 5 months, you know, they're tired, they want to get back to school and things like that. So handling them and then coming back to school and all that, it's a whole lot of new things for us, but we cope.
Oluwadamilare switched from on-site to virtual education when schools were shut due to the pandemic. With training, she has since overcome some of the preliminary challenges.
Yes, we've had a series of training for my school in particular. We did trainings during the holidays and trainings just a week after resumption. We did fresh training to help us before the children came in. The major challenges were at the initial stages. I mean, we didn't plan this, it just showed up. So we had to adjust. We couldn't write exams. We had to start working through with the children during the online classes. We had challenges with that, with network. We had challenges with getting the children to be settled online. So those basic challenges, for me, we have run through them. Coming to school isn't a big deal anymore.
Women's participation in formal and informal labor markets has been on the rise. According to the World Bank, women make up 45.5% of the Nigerian labor force. Many have been badly hit by the socio-economic impact of the COVID-19 pandemic. But like Oluwadamilare, many are facing these new challenges head-on. Kelechi Emekalam, CGTN Abuja, Nigeria.
The Committee of the Communist Party of China has released a communique of the 5th plenary session. The statement of the 19th Central Committee of the Communist Party of China has been passed at the session held in Beijing from October 26th to 29th. According to the communique, President Xi Jinping, who is also General Secretary of the CPC Central Committee, has made an important speech at this session. The session heard and discussed a work report that she delivered on behalf of the Political Bureau of the CPC Central Committee. Earlier, our reporter Sen Juan talked about China's investment and efforts in technology and science innovation during the 13th five-year plan period.
Data from the Ministry of Science and Technology shows China spent 1.4 trillion yuan in research and development. That amount nearly doubled in 2019, reaching 2.21 trillion yuan. In the Global Innovation Index released by the World Intellectual Property Organization, from 2015 to 2020, China jumped from 29th to the 14th place. Chinese high-tech firm has grown from 2015's 79,000 to 2019's 225,000. Major scientific breakthroughs include China's SkyEye, a 500-meter radio telescope, the Chang'e 4 probe landing on the far side of the moon early last year, as well as the unmanned submersible Haidou 1 setting a deep dive record. This comes against the backdrop, of course, of the tech war with the United States. Chinese Science and Tech Minister Wang told CGTN the global tech front is a major battlefield. The Trump administration has recently strengthened restrictions on China's Huawei technologies. It also moved to sanction China-owned apps TikTok and WeChat. So far, the U.S. Appeals Court has rejected the immediate WeChat ban. But last Friday, the U.S. District Court in Washington has ruled the administration should be allowed to impose restrictions on TikTok. Huawei CEO Ren Zhengfei says the U.S. has advocated decoupling from China's and tech development, but opening up and collaboration is unstoppable. He says inclusiveness is what advances us in technological discovery and innovation.
You're watching Africa Live. Coming up in business news, Africa's financial markets show improved resilience despite the COVID-19 pandemic. And Lagos business activities slowly return to normal following last week's protests against police brutality.
Taken me completely out of my depth, but at the same time it's exciting. It's new, it's different, it's a challenge.
It's really exciting.
Africa is the nexus of enterprise, and global business will tell you why it matters.
From the mega investment projects to multi-billion-dollar mergers and acquisitions.
Africa today collects, just in terms of revenues from taxes alone, $545 billion a year. If you take 10% of that and you devote it to the energy sector, problem solved.
All this on Global Business, weekdays at this time on CGTN.
Africa Live. Find your voice.
Chinese President Xi Jinping is set to deliver an online speech at the opening ceremony of the 3rd China International Import Expo. The opening ceremony will take place on November 4th and the expo will run from November 4th to 10th. This year, it will host domestic and foreign companies in 6 exhibition halls in the city of Shanghai. Organizers say more than 500,000 people have so far registered for the event. The expo will cover different sectors, including consumer goods, agricultural products, and information technology. One of the highlights will be a special zone focused on public health and epidemic prevention. Africa's financial markets have suddenly been tested by the pandemic, but the 2020 edition of the Absa Financial Markets Index shows improved resilience across the board. The index revealed that financial markets in Africa are proving to be robust, with countries like South Africa and Mauritius leading the way. The countries whose standing improved the most from last year are Ghana, Morocco and Seychelles. Stronger legal frameworks and growing local investor capacity contributed to better scores overall. They concluded that the expansion and innovation that have taken place in recent years will help in Africa's rebound and recovery process. The index saw only 6 out of 17 countries score above 50 in 2017, with many performing poorly on more than 40 indicators considered. This year, 14 out of 23 countries scored above 50, indicating improvements across the board. The index is independently produced by the official Monetary and Financial Institutions Forum and serves as a guide for governments to put the necessary infrastructure in place to deepen and improve markets. South Africa's Finance Minister Tito Mboweni has warned against a spiraling debt problem. The minister has tabled the country's medium-term budget in Parliament. Debt levels are expected to rise to 95% of the GDP over the next 5 years. Mboweni gave some details of a plan to bring that debt under control. He also announced new budget allocations to government departments, which included further funding for the cash-strapped South African Airways. Sumitra Naidu picks up that story.
The finance minister tried to balance out the fragile fiscus. He called on South Africans to help rebuild the economy as they did in 1994. But he warned that debt will spiral out of control if urgent action is not taken.
The economy now is expected to contract by 7.8% this year. And the 2021 outlook is more uncertain. Job losses have been particularly severe. But we cannot allow ourselves to fall into a season of despair, despite the challenges of the pandemic. We cannot allow ourselves to move towards a sovereign debt crisis.
The minister tabled a 5-year fiscal consolidation pathway to promote economic growth. He said there would be a wage freeze for all public workers. Currently, government's wage bill is around $187 million. Ailing state-owned entity SAA also received a budget allocation.
10.5 billion rand is allocated to SAA to implement its business rescue plan. This allocation is funded through reductions to the baselines of national departments, public entities, and conditional grants. This allocation is in addition to the 16.4 billion rand allocated over the 2020 MTF in the February budget for settling guaranteed debt and interest.
Social funding was raised. The minister noted that it was imperative to take care of poor and vulnerable South Africans. More money will go towards job creation and employment opportunities, but several government plans in this regard have failed. Many are keen to see how this money will be spent.
One would have expected that a lot more would have been given by way of saying, okay, guys, we're saying we'll create 800,000 jobs. This is how we think we'll achieve that. This project here will employ 20,000. This one will employ 50. This one will employ this much. And this is how we're going to spend the 100 billion rands.
It's going to take us many, many years just to recover to where we were at the end of 2019, which wasn't a great place in the first place. We have an increasing population, and GDP has to rise by significantly more than that to really move people's incomes.
The markets fell sharply, but that was on the back of international news. The rand weakened slightly. Sumitra Nadu, CGTN, Johannesburg, South Africa.
Zimbabwe's glowing background on inflation, which had soared to a 10-year high of 8.37% in July. Authorities now expected to end the year at 134%, more than halving the central bank's previous forecast. The Reserve Bank of Zimbabwe had previously forecast 2020 annual inflation at 300%. From Harare is CGTN's Ferry Mokduya with the details.
The rate at which prices of goods have been going up has slowed down in recent months, bringing relief to hard-pressed shoppers, but also emboldening Treasury officials, who had initially projected annual inflation to come down to 300% by year-end, but have now halved that forecast. Monthly inflation is expected to perform even better.
The month-on-month figures are the ones that matter, and I think by then we might see single-digit inflation month by month, which will mean that we are really making a lot of headway compared to the figures of 70–80% month on month, sometimes 600–700% year on year. Those sort of figures are now coming down to much more reasonable figures, but even 3 or 4% a month is a high rate of inflation. What we want is 3 or 4% a year, and so we've got some way to go to get there, but I think we might do it in 2021.
Stability has been brought by a weekly foreign currency auction that has improved availability of hard currency at the official exchange rate. There's still a mismatch between the demand for and supply of foreign currency, which manifests itself in continued activity, albeit subdued, on the black market. Getting adequate foreign currency requires rebuilding productive capacity.
That means we need investors. And that means we need investment policies that are attractive to investors. Right now, the investors around the world comparing the conditions and the regulations and the restrictions and the licenses that we demand in Zimbabwe, they're saying it's easier to start a business somewhere else.
Over the last 2 years, Zimbabwe has stepped up reforms to improve the ease of doing business and to attract foreign capital. Government has also been keeping a tight leash on expenditures, including resisting unsustainable wage increases that could cause inflation to rise again. Farai Mwakutuya, CGTN, Harare, Zimbabwe.
South Sudan's government says it's working to salvage the country's economy. It has also called for further international assistance. A fall in global oil prices and a long-lasting civil war triggered inflation, pushing prices of basic goods beyond the reach of many in the East African nation.
I would want to reassure you that the government is fully committed to work with all its stakeholders to implement the revitalized peace agreement, because we are all determined to have a permanent stability and prosperity in our country.
The collapse in oil prices has resulted in the widening budget deficit that has been explained. The government's capacity to deliver peace dividends that may indeed put at risk the revitalized agreement on the resolution of conflict in the Republic of South Sudan. And this is of enormous concern to all of us as your partners.
Our hope as development partners is to see the Republic of South Sudan investing in its service sector, particularly in delivering health and education, which are held up not just by, in terms of international norms, but also in the peace process.
Economic activities in Nigeria's commercial city Lagos are gradually returning to normal. It follows last week's SARS protests that led to shutdowns and a curfew in 4 states. The majority of business owners have taken advantage of the relative calm to resume operations, but others are still counting their losses following the prolonged unrest that disrupted movement of goods and services. Here's CGTN's Deji Badmas with an update on the situation.
It's the first day this massive shopping mall in the heart of Lagos would be reopening after the violence that hit the city. The shop owners here are returning to virtually empty shops. All 150 shops in the Adeniran Ogunsanya Mall, the Surulere axis of Lagos, were completely looted. This shop sells clothes, but all the clothes are now gone. It's the same story for this perfume shop. Everything looted. And wait for this one. The liaison office of a university.
They broke into our shops, took accessories, printing press machines, they took computers, televisions. They also took so many things, so many effects that really affected us. Like they took close to over 10 million in worth, what they've taken from the office.
Most of the capital here is from hedge funds, from venture capital, from banks, from finance companies, and loan raised from family and other individuals. It's a trading cycle here. You only live off of the commission. So I empathize with them. It is not easy to experience black economy. It was white economy before, but right now it's black economy for them.
For now, no trading is going on at the mall as the traders continue to take stock of their loss. It would certainly be a while before this place comes back to what it once was.
These people actually need help. As soon as those helps comes, then some of them that has insurance, those ones can access their insurance claim and then start business. But for those who are without insurance, certainly government will have to, one way or the other, assist them, because the earlier they come back, the earlier we're able to create jobs and we're able to restart the economy.
The Lagos state government has committed to assist those whose shops were looted in the violence. How quickly the government is able to mobilize the funds and get them to the traders will to some extent determine how quickly some of the looted shops in this shopping mall resume operations. Deji Badmas, CGTN, Lagos, Nigeria.
Reports say aircraft engine and luxury car manufacturer Rolls-Royce is preparing to close factories temporarily and cut working hours. It's part of its current cost-cutting drive to cope with a collapse in aircraft demand. And as Andrew Wilson explains, the UK brand is not alone.
There's a lot at stake here. Rolls-Royce has been making engines as long as planes have taken passengers, and it's an iconic UK brand. The rights issue puts badly needed funding back into the operation in time for the company to tackle next year's debt after posting $6 million losses in the first 2 quarters of 2020. Rolls-Royce is preparing a massive cost-cutting exercise, closing factories and reducing working hours. 9,000 jobs are already in jeopardy, and strike action next month seems unavoidable. But the engine manufacturer is far from alone. Across the globe, airlines and airports are reeling from the effects of coronavirus, pulling the plug on this enormous sector.
Thing that's obviously a problem at the moment is the requirement for quarantine in certain parts of the world. I mean, if you go to the UK at the moment, you're subject to 14 days quarantine, and a lot of people aren't able to afford the time. Till we've got those harmonised, we're not going to see the confidence return to travel, and obviously travel is the absolute key to getting the global economy and to get the social mobility of the entire planet back to levels that I think we'd all like to see.
Low-cost carrier EasyJet has raised nearly $500 million by selling and leasing back part of its fleet. And while the leasing market has been relatively buoyant during the pandemic, EasyJet's aircraft sales are still dwarfed by its losses. For national carriers, engine manufacturers and budget airlines alike, the missing ingredient is passenger confidence and quarantine-free travel. Until people can move unrestricted between borders again, there'll be no V-shaped recovery for this sector. Andrew Wilson, CGTN.
You're watching Africa Live. We're taking a short break. Don't go far. There's still plenty coming up, including this. Beijing's former steel factory is set to become China's new base for science fiction.
Join us in global business and see Africa through our eyes.
You're watching breaking news on CGTN.
Welcome to the world today on CGTN.
China's achievements in science and technology have emerged from bold dreams. The world of science fiction is seen by experts as vital to inspiring continued innovation. The 5th China Science Fiction Conference in Beijing this Sunday is a part of it. Let's find out more.
The 5th annual conference, to be held at Shougang Park, a former steel mill that's now part of Beijing's revitalized landmarks, will be the grandest event yet and aims to boosting the country's sci-fi industry.
The conference will last for a week with nearly 20 activities, which represent the future direction of the domestic sci-fi industry. Beijing has nearly 1,000 sci-fi-related technical companies. The Sci-Fi Conference will promote, support, and drive the fast development of the industry.
More importantly, the conference will herald the opening of a sci-fi city in the park. Beijing authorities will spend 10 years building a 160,000 square meter sci-fi park covering 71 hectares. The themed park will be part of the capital's sci-fi industrial development project in the western district of Shijingshan, which China envisions as a hub for key technologies, innovative talents, and field construction.
For a long time, our country has been treating the sci-fi field as an educational undertaking. However, the development of the science industry is relatively lagging. Beijing came up with the idea of building the city into a center for science fiction business and industry with world influence. The conference will promote our country's science fiction business and industry, taking them to the next level.
China has set the goals of pushing the scientific literacy rate from 8.5% in 2018 to 10% by 2020, to reach an advanced level globally by 2035 and a leading position by 2050. Zhang Meiyuan, CGTN.
Coming up in sports, Barcelona